They called it Shaft 9, deeper than anything the Grayson Hollow mining company had ever attempted. The old-timers said it was too ambitious, too sudden, digging where no seams had ever run. But coal prices were up, and the company saw opportunity buried in the untouched rock below the Appalachian crust. So they drilled. For weeks, machines groaned against the bones of the earth, carving a new artery beneath a town that barely clung to life. Some welcomed the jobs. Others just shook their heads, remembering what their grandfathers used to say, not all ground wants to be opened. The first weeks went smoothly by mining standards anyway. No cave-ins, no mechanical failures, just the usual dust and diesel. But everyone noticed the silence. Down in Shaft 9, radios crackled and then died. Voices didn't carry the same way. You could stand 10 feet from a man and his words would come like whispers through cotton. Dead air, someone muttered. Like the rocks listening. No one laughed. Because you didn't joke about things underground. You respected it. Like you would a church. That Monday morning, 6 men were assigned to the new tunnel cut. Foreman Darrell King led the group, his hard hat dented from 20 years of near misses. Caleb Mercer, barely 17, was the youngest on the crew. His father had worked the mine before black lung claimed him. Now Caleb worked it too. When they climbed into the cage that would drop them down to the new shaft, the sky was just starting to break open with a pale gold light. No one said a word. Just boots scuffing steel, the echo of breath against the corrugated metal walls. 15 minutes later, the cage came back up too fast. Only 4 men were inside. Caleb and Benny Ruiz weren't among them. The men who surfaced looked shaken, pale. One of them dropped to his knees the moment the cage door opened, mumbling something no one could catch. Another man kept his eyes shut tight, whispering a prayer that sounded older than any language used in town. The foreman rushed down immediately with 2 others. When they returned, they had the boys. Unhurt, but different. Caleb wouldn't talk for hours. He just sat on the locker bench, shaking his head. When his mother came to fetch him, he looked her in the eyes and said one sentence before breaking down in tears. "There's a woman down there." No one understood. A lost hiker? A trespasser? But when the company reviewed the footage from the shaft cameras, one segment had glitched 12 seconds of static and then a single frame that showed nothing but blinding white. The mine closed for inspection that night. Temporarily, they said. But something had opened in the deep, and those who went down into the dark started to whisper the same thing. The ground didn't feel the same anymore, like it had woken up. It didn't take long for the stories to spread. By Tuesday morning, the coffee at Lila's diner was going cold in half-full mugs as men leaned in and whispered about the look on Caleb Mercer's face. A few said he saw something simple, maybe a cave shadow, maybe a gas flare. But others, the ones who'd worked the mine longest, who'd seen things they never spoke about, said the boy's eyes weren't scared. They were reverent, like he hadn't seen a threat at all but a presence. The mine reopened after a 24-hour pause. Official word from Grayson Hollow Mining was routine equipment recalibration. But nobody talked about calibration over their breakfast plates. They talked about the cold, how Shaft 9 never seemed to hold heat, even when the furnace lines ran full blast. One man said his breath fogged just standing near the new tunnel entrance, and that when he set his gloved hand against the rock wall, it felt like ice straight from the freezer. Still, miners don't spook easy. They've lived too long with death pressing against them in the dark to jump at ghost stories. So the rotation went on. The next shift went down with full kits, floodlights, oxygen, and backup generators. This time, there were no glitches in the cameras, no skip frames, just 3 hours of routine footage, and yet, when they came back up, no one would talk. Not even Foreman King. All 6 men emerged wordless, eyes a little too wide, helmets held under their arms like schoolboys leaving confession. That night, a meeting was called in the break room. Management insisted it was voluntary, but everyone came. The lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale yellow haze over the room as the superintendent cleared his throat and said, "Nothing's down there, gentlemen. It's just rock. Let's not let fear eat up our productivity." Someone coughed. No one clapped. Then Benny Ruiz stood up from the back of the room. He hadn't spoken since the incident, until now. "She's not made of rock," he said, his voice dry and cracking. "She's not carved. She's placed." Every head turned. "She's waiting." The room fell dead silent. Later, when someone asked what he meant, he wouldn't answer. He just said it again, softer. "She's waiting." The next morning, the maintenance crew reported something strange. A toolbox left overnight outside Shaft 9 had been opened. Nothing was missing, but each tool was rearranged in perfect order. Not just neat symmetric, laid out as if for a ritual or a blessing. One of the mechanics swore he smelled lilies. Another said he heard humming, faint and low, like the sound of church choirs from inside thick walls. By the end of the week, even the most rational men in town began to avoid the lower shaft. They'd trade shifts, work the old seams, take fewer hours. Anything but go back down into the part of the mine where the light didn't reach and where something holy, or haunted, seemed to be watching. The hills around Grayson Hollow have always whispered their own kind of warnings. Not in words exactly, but in signs. The trees that won't grow straight near certain creeks, the spots in the forest where animals won't nest, the stretches of trail where compasses spin even on clear days. Folks around there don't call it superstition, they call it listening. And for generations, one warning passed between kitchen tables and front porch rockers with the same solemnity as a funeral psalm. Don't dig where the ground stays quiet. That phrase came roaring back the week Shaft 9 opened. Old May Delaney, nearly 90 and blind since her 40s, sat on her porch and muttered it to the wind as though the mountain could still hear her. Her granddaughter, who worked the register at the general store, told anyone who'd listen that her Granny May knew something was wrong before the first shovel hit. She said the silence around Shaft 9 wasn't the kind that soothed, it was the kind that pressed against your ears, made your thoughts feel muffled, like being underwater. Of course, the mining company dismissed it all. They issued pamphlets, safety reports, even brought in an outside consultant from Pittsburgh to reassure the town. But no document could explain the headaches, the static-filled radios, or the way flashlights flickered only when facing east in the new shaft. It got worse when one of the foremen found his rosary beads, usually tucked safely in his lunch pail, laid out in a perfect circle on the locker room bench. "You think someone's playing games?" the superintendent asked. But no one answered, because everyone knew. Miners don't joke about sacred things, and especially not underground. Then came the birds. Grayson Hollow didn't have much wildlife, but swallows used to nest near the mine's mouth. After Shaft 9 opened, they vanished. Not migrated, vanished. One morning, the maintenance man found 3 of them lying just outside the shaft entrance. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just still. And still, the company pressed on. It was Benny Ruiz's grandmother, a woman who'd never stepped foot in the mine but had lived through 3 disasters, who said it plainly during a prayer circle at the community center. You don't dig in a place that's already been claimed. When asked what she meant, she looked to the ceiling and crossed herself. That shaft ain't theirs anymore. Someone else is waiting down there. By now, Caleb had stopped sleeping. He said he heard a voice when he closed his eyes, not words, just a hum, constant and low, like breath through a cave. "She's not angry," he whispered to his mother one night, "but she's not patient either." And that was the fear that settled like coal dust on the town. Not that something evil had been unleashed, but that something holy had been disturbed. And holy things, when disrespected, don't always forgive. The miners began to notice it first. Every time the gate to Shaft 9 opened, a gust of air rushed up from the dark, a cold, damp wind that felt less like natural draft and more like breath. It wasn't steady, and it didn't match any airflow readings. Sometimes it came fast, sharp enough to blow out lanterns. Other times it came slow and deliberate, like someone exhaling from deep inside the mountain. By the 3rd week, they were calling it the sigh. At first, the engineers chalked it up to pressure changes. Old air displacing new, they said. A textbook ventilation anomaly. But no one could explain why the cold air smelled like stones soaked in frankincense, or why the draft only came when someone said her name. By then, she had become the only way most workers referred to the presence they felt. No one said virgin, no one said statue, just she, the lady in the cave, the one who watched them. Even the mine dogs wouldn't go near the shaft anymore. Their handlers tried everything, bribes, commands, even dragging, but the animals whimpered, pulled back, and tucked their tails between their legs. One old hound named Jasper, who'd worked shafts for nearly a decade without issue, snapped his leash trying to escape when the door to Shaft 9 cracked open. He didn't stop running until he reached the tree line. Inside the shaft, tools began to go missing. Not stolen, not misplaced, just gone. A pickaxe left against the wall would vanish. A drill bit would disappear from the cart. And then, days later, it would reappear clean, polished, resting neatly at the base of the tunnel where the air was coldest. It wasn't sabotage, it wasn't theft, it was something else. A rearranging, like a presence was moving things, testing them, choosing what to return and what to keep. Then, one morning, a soft layer of white powder was found on the floor near the chamber's entrance. Not coal dust, not limestone, something finer like ash but lighter. Father Miguel was the one who noticed first. He touched it to his tongue and went pale. "It's blessed salt," he whispered. "It shouldn't be here." The company ordered fans installed at the shaft mouth to normalize airflow. But every time they were turned on, the motors groaned and sputtered. Two burnt out in a single shift. One exploded outright, sending shrapnel into the rock wall, narrowly missing a technician. After that, no one tried again. The cold stayed. The sigh kept coming. And it always came after silence. One afternoon, Foreman King stood alone at the edge of the shaft. He listened. No voices, no wind, nothing. And then, with a sharp, breathless rush, the air struck his chest like a wave. It chilled him to the bone. And in that exact moment, the floodlights flickered, and for just one breath, the shape of a woman appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Still, watching, waiting. It was supposed to be routine. Just another night shift, same as every other. A three-man crew had been assigned to monitor the lower shaft, check for new fissures, tighten support bolts, and ensure the newly installed floodlights stayed operational. Foreman Darrell King, still shaken from what he'd seen days before, didn't join them this time. He just stood at the surface with a clipboard and a stiff jaw, pretending he wasn't watching the elevator's red indicator light blink its descent down into the deep. The shift ended at 3:00 a.m. By then, only two men returned. The third, Samuel Shiv Edwards, a welder from Hazard County and father of five, hadn't gotten hurt. He hadn't gotten lost. He just stayed. The others said he'd gone quiet when they reached the new chamber just past the point where the temperature dropped and the air grew still. There was a tool cart station there, and next to it, one of the portable lanterns had been left the day before. It was on. No one remembered turning it on. And yet there it stood, flickering softly, casting shadows against the curved stone walls. The strange part wasn't that it was still burning. The strange part was that it had been burning for over 30 hours. These lamps didn't last more than 6.5 tops. But this one had a glow like steady flame, dancing slightly, almost warm. Shiv had walked up to it slowly, the others said. He knelt down, just looked at it. Then he stood and took off his helmet. He placed it at the base of the wall, right beside the light, and said, "She doesn't want us gone. She just wants us still." Then he sat cross-legged and folded his hands. They begged him to come back. He wouldn't move. "I need to stay," he said calmly. "She's praying, and someone ought to pray with her." They left him there. He returned the next morning on his own, covered in dust but unharmed. When asked why he didn't answer the radio, he simply said, "Didn't need it. I wasn't alone." They checked the lantern. It was still burning. They watched it for another 3 hours until it finally dimmed on its own, never losing battery, never showing heat. After that, no one left equipment near the chamber anymore. No one wanted to risk it being chosen. The story spread fast, not just through the miners, but through the whole town. That night, a group of locals gathered at the mouth of the mine, with candles in hand. Not to protest, not to chant, just to stand, to be present. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else placed a lily on the gate lock. Down below, in the shaft where the cold breath of the earth whispered over stone, the light didn't flicker anymore. It glowed, as if it had been accepted. The first person to really describe her, wasn't a miner, wasn't a priest, wasn't even old enough to drive. It was 11-year-old Lucas Mallory. His father, Greg, was a mechanic for the mining rigs and had picked up a few extra shifts during the recent inspections. With no sitter and no school that Friday afternoon, Greg brought Lucas with him to the site, promising he'd stay in the admin trailer with a coloring book and some headphones. But kids get curious, and rules mean little when something calls you. No one noticed Lucas slip out of the trailer. No one saw him duck behind the portable generators or inch down the long slope toward the now restricted entrance of Shaft 9. When a supervisor finally spotted the boy 15 minutes later, Lucas was standing motionless just a few feet from the gate. His face was pale, his eyes wide, not in fear, but in something that looked almost like reverence. They brought him back up, scolded Greg, and checked the security footage to figure out how close he'd gotten. He never went inside. And yet, when they asked him what he saw, Lucas didn't hesitate. "There's a lady in there," he said softly, not looking up from the blanket someone had wrapped around his shoulders. "She's standing in the stone, like she was asleep a long time. Her eyes are down, but she sees everything." The supervisor laughed nervously. "How do you know that if you didn't go in, son?" Lucas turned and looked him straight in the eyes. "Because she looked at me." His mother was called immediately. Father Miguel showed up not long after. They asked him to draw what he saw. He didn't draw a statue. He didn't draw marble or cloth or anything resembling church art. What he drew was soft. A woman of light, her face gentle, sorrowful, her arms not just open but reaching, not frozen in stone, but living in stillness. Lucas handed the drawing to Father Miguel, who sat back slowly and pressed his fingers to his lips. "That's not a statue," he murmured. "That's a visitation." The boy said one more thing before falling asleep on the church cot. "She told me not to be scared," he whispered. "She said, 'Tell them I was here before you, and I will be here after.'" Word spread fast, as it always does in towns where people listen more than they speak. The paper didn't run the story. No one wanted reporters sniffing around. But in coffee shops and on back porches, the name Lucas Mallory became the reference point. People didn't say, "Did you hear about the cave?" anymore. They said, "Did you hear what the boy saw?" And even the skeptics found it hard to dismiss, because children don't fake awe like that. They don't cry from beauty. They don't lie about being seen by something holy unless something holy truly saw them. It happened just after sunrise on a Wednesday, the kind of blue sky morning that made people in Grayson Hollow forget, briefly, that anything strange was unfolding beneath their feet. The team had been rerouting electrical lines through the upper shafts, nowhere near the chamber where the woman had appeared, or so they thought. But when a pressure reading pinged unusually high on the monitors, they sent down a small exploratory crew, just 3 men, and a seismic tech to investigate a suspected blockage. Shaft 9 hadn't been used in days. The air by then had taken on a chill even the heating coils couldn't fight. Still, they pressed in, flashlights sweeping across rust-colored stone and sagging cables. It was supposed to be routine, but 20 minutes in, the ground shifted. No explosion, no tremor, just the kind of soft, deep groan that sounds more like a sigh than a crack. The tech shouted something, but the words were swallowed by a dull echo as a section of wall to their right simply crumbled. Not a violent cave-in, more like a door giving way. When the dust cleared, they were standing at the edge of a void. A round chamber, perfectly formed, as though carved by water over centuries, but smoother, cleaner, like it had been shaped by something with intention. And in the center of it, rising from a pedestal of untouched stone, was the statue. Only, it didn't look like a statue. Not really. She stood just over 5 feet tall, her form cloaked in folds that looked like fabric but caught the light like pearl. Her face was angled down, eyes closed or perhaps barely open, no one could quite tell. Her arms were extended slightly, not in welcome, but in stillness, a position of readiness or waiting. And at her feet, untouched by dust or rubble, were lilies. Real ones, fresh. The men didn't speak. They couldn't. One of them dropped to his knees and crossed himself. The seismic tech backed out slowly, whispering "Mother of God" over and over, like a man who just remembered how to pray. Up at the surface, the footage from the headlamp cameras played on a grainy monitor. Silence swept the control room. The superintendent left halfway through, face white as chalk. The miners, rough men who'd laughed off ghost stories for years, stood behind the operator in stunned silence, hats in hand. No one could explain it. No previous crew had broken into that chamber. No blasting had been done. No records showed any tunnel ever touching that section of the rock. And yet, there she was, whole, clean, waiting. That afternoon, the entrance to the shaft was sealed not by order, but by quiet agreement. No tape, no warning signs. Just an unspoken truth passed from man to man. She doesn't want to be moved. She just wants to be found. And now, she had been. They called her a statue because they didn't know what else to call her. But that word never fit quite right. Statues don't shimmer when no light touches them. They don't cause hardened men to weep. They don't make the air feel like the inside of a cathedral. Still, when the initial reports went up the chain, first to corporate, then to the diocese, she was described in clinical terms. A female religious figure, approximate height, 5'3", possibly made of alabaster or unpolished marble. Intact. Found in a previously undocumented underground chamber. That was the summary typed at the top of the report. But to the men who had seen her, no words came close. She stood on a smooth stone pedestal, which itself seemed to rise naturally from the floor of the cavern. No construction seams, no chisel marks. Just a gentle rise, as if the earth had been holding her in its hand for centuries. Her robes weren't carved in the usual sense. They seemed to fold and fall like cloth frozen in time, too delicate, too soft-looking for stone. And her face, that was the part no one could agree on. Some said she was young, others said she looked like someone's grandmother. Some swore her lips were parted, as if about to speak. Others insisted her eyes were closed until they weren't. The only thing they all agreed on was her expression. Not sorrowful, Not joyous, watchful, protective. The name came quickly, without debate. The Virgin in the stone. Not of the stone. In it. As though she'd been placed there not as art, but as witness. And maybe as warning. Father Miguel was the first to bless the chamber. He came alone, carrying nothing but a silver cross, a small flask of holy water, and a psalter. He descended the shaft without speaking, even when others offered to go with him. When he emerged hours later, his face was streaked with tears. "She's been here longer than us," he said. "Longer than this mine, longer than this town." He held up the empty flask. I sprinkled her feet and said a prayer. Before I finished, the water had already dried. The air was warm, just around her, like something had woken up. Corporate wanted answers. So they sent in geologists, structural engineers, even an art historian from Chicago who specialized in Renaissance sculpture. None of them made it more than 10 minutes inside the chamber. One claimed his instruments stopped working. Another said the ground beneath her pedestal vibrated like a heartbeat. The art historian fainted and had to be carried out. When asked what she saw, she whispered, "That's not man-made. That's not made at all." The town grew quieter, not out of fear, but out of awe. It wasn't just that something holy had been found, it was that it had always been there, waiting, watching. And though no one could explain it, everyone felt it in their bones. She didn't come to be seen. She came because it was time. His name was Roy Clements. 32 years in the mines. Never missed a shift. Never spoke more than necessary. He wasn't a man easily rattled. He'd pulled friends out of cave-ins, stood inches from a gas pocket ignition, even lost the tip of his ring finger to a falling drill plate, and showed up to work the next day with it taped and bandaged. Roy was among the handful permitted to enter the chamber for what they called containment assessment. It was a term the company used to reassure legal teams, insurance agents, and board members who'd never spent a day underground. But Roy wasn't there to write a report. He was there because he wanted to see her with his own eyes. They said he only lasted 5 minutes inside. When he came back up, he didn't speak. He didn't even remove his helmet. He walked straight past the other men, past the foreman, past the priest waiting near the elevator platform, and out into the sunlight like a man half sleepwalking. Later that night, his wife found him kneeling in their backyard, hands clasped, eyes closed, his work boots still covered in dust. The barbecue grill beside him had been turned on but left cold. When she asked what happened, Roy whispered one thing. She looked at me. He wouldn't say what he saw. Not then, not ever. But the next morning, he turned in his resignation. Walked away from 3 decades of work, a full pension, and a crew that treated him like blood. "I'm not needed there anymore," he told the superintendent. "She knows I came. That's enough." He wasn't the only one. Others began reporting strange dreams. Men who'd only been near the shaft entrance said they saw her face when they closed their eyes, soft, sorrowful, and close. One man claimed he woke in the middle of the night with the sensation that someone had placed a hand gently on his chest. When he looked down, there was a fine layer of dust in the shape of a palm. Another worker, a second-generation miner named Travis Moore, broke down sobbing during dinner with his family. No warning, no words, just tears rolling into his plate of mashed potatoes as he repeated, "She saw everything. Everything I've ever done." People began calling it the gaze. They said it wasn't like being judged. It wasn't even like being forgiven. It was like being known all at once. Every lie, every kindness, every betrayal, every prayer left unsaid. And once you felt that, there was no going back. Not to regular life. Not to pretending you were small or unseen. The psychologist flown in from Lexington to assess the mental toll of sight exposure lasted less than half a day. She called her office from the hotel that night and requested to be reassigned. All she told her assistant was this: "It's not in their heads, it's in her eyes." And the eyes were always open, whether the statue's lids moved or not. He didn't come in robes, didn't bring incense or altar boys or the bishop's signature. He arrived in a dusty sedan with 3,000 miles on the odometer, wearing a threadbare jacket, black slacks, and a crucifix that looked older than the town itself. Father Joseph Miguel had served parishes across the state places where pews creaked, and the kneelers had long since lost their cushion. He wasn't famous, he wasn't high-ranking, but he was the one they called when something spiritual refused to be polite. No one greeted him formally. He didn't want it. He shook the superintendent's hand, nodded once to the foreman, and asked to see the chamber. "You sure you don't want a full briefing first?" they offered. "I've been briefed," he said. "Now I'd like to be silent in front of her." Oh. They sent 2 men to escort him down the shaft, but he waved them off at the elevator door. If she's calling, I should answer alone. And so he descended one man against the mountain, carrying nothing but a small bottle of holy water and a single candle in his coat pocket. What happened during those hours, no one fully knows. The headlamp footage was hazy. Cameras at the chamber entrance blinked in and out, distorting every few minutes. But the audio recorded one thing clearly: chanting. Not Latin, not English. Something softer, slower, more rhythmic than linguistic, like a lullaby hummed through centuries of dust. He emerged just before nightfall. His hair, once peppered gray, looked stark white. His steps were careful, not shaken but humbled. "She doesn't need an exorcism," he said softly to the small group that had gathered around the shaft entrance. "She needs recognition." They led him into the break room for water and rest. He sat quietly for a long while, eyes fixed on nothing. Then he leaned forward and said, "This isn't the first time she's appeared beneath the earth." "What do you mean?" someone asked. "I mean, the records are scattered," he said. "But every few decades, in some place forgotten, in a cave or a mine or a trench, someone finds her, always watching, always waiting, and always reminding us who we are when no one else is looking." He took the candle from his coat pocket. It had burned halfway. The wax was untouched. Not a single drop had spilled. "I left this at her feet," he said. "When I turned back to pick it up, it had moved. A few inches closer, toward me." Uh, no one knew what to say. That night, Father Miguel didn't return to the rectory. He stayed in Grayson Hollow, slept on a cot in the chapel, and at sunrise, walked the mile from town to the edge of the mining road, sat on a bench someone had placed there, and prayed silently toward the shaft he would not enter again. Because once was enough. Once was everything. It began as a puddle, small, silent, formed just beneath the Virgin's feet on the smooth stone floor of the chamber. The miners noticed it first, thinking it was seepage from a cracked pipe or groundwater rising through the rock. But there were no pipes, and the floor had been dry since the chamber had opened. Still, every morning, the puddle was there, no larger than a dinner plate, clear as glass, reflecting her face in perfect detail. At first, no one touched it. Then came Thomas Lee. Tommy was a rig technician who had been burned badly in a welder malfunction 3 weeks prior. His left arm, from elbow to wrist, was wrapped in gauze. The pain hadn't let up since the incident. He'd come back to work early, not out of duty, but because he couldn't sleep. Not with the dreams he'd been having. He said they weren't nightmares. He called them callings. That morning, Tommy was assigned to deliver replacement parts to the relay station just outside the chamber. No further. But when he saw the water, something pulled him forward. He said he didn't think. Didn't question. Just dropped to one knee, unwrapped the bandage from his arm, and dipped a corner of it into the puddle. The water was warm. Not hot, not lukewarm. Warm like hands. He stood and wrapped the soaked cloth back around his burn. By that evening, the pain was gone. By morning, the angry red skin had faded to a pale pink, as though weeks of healing had passed in hours. By the third day, the skin was smooth, untouched, like it had never been burned. He didn't tell anyone at first, but others noticed. The way he moved his arm, the absence of pain in his voice, the quiet awe in his eyes. And when he finally told the foreman what happened, it wasn't boastful. It was almost an apology. "I didn't mean to take something," he said. "I think," she gave it. Words spread like it always did, in whispers and gasps, not headlines. People began visiting the chamber, less for inspection and more for stillness. Some came in pairs, others alone. Most stood quietly. A few knelt. And every morning, the puddle remained. It never grew, never shrank, never evaporated. The water stayed exactly as it was, pure, unmoving, and untouched, except for the few who dared. One miner dipped his fingers in and prayed for his daughter, who had been diagnosed with leukemia. A week later, her numbers stabilized. Another left a photo of his late wife beside the puddle. When he returned 2 days later, the photo was gone, but a single lily had bloomed in its place. Scientists wanted samples. The company wanted tests, but the town wanted reverence. They roped off the entrance, posted a sign with no warnings, no laws. Just 5 words, scrawled in paint. "Please enter with clean hands, because some water isn't for washing, it's for remembering." They never found the source. No speakers, no radios, no hidden devices. Just sounds slow, deep, and reverent, rising from the earth like a hymn remembered by stone. It began just past midnight on a Tuesday. 3 inspectors had been sent down from the state board to evaluate the structural integrity of the chamber after reports of increased foot traffic and minor shifts in air pressure. They weren't believers, Just men in hard hats with clipboards and a schedule. But somewhere between 17 and 23 a.m., their headlamps dimmed at the exact same time. Not off, not dead, just lower, softer, like the darkness had thickened. And then the sound began. It wasn't music, not exactly, but it had a rhythm, a rise and fall, like chanting but no words, no melody, just tones that resonated in the chest and wrapped around the bones. Like standing inside a cathedral with invisible choirs tucked into the rafters, singing only for the stone itself. The inspectors froze. One of them later said he dropped his clipboard and didn't realize until hours later. Another confessed that he cried, not out of fear, but because something about the sound made him feel seen, not watched. Known. Back at the surface, a maintenance crew noticed something strange. The vibration sensors picked up frequencies, but not from the usual equipment. They pulsed like waves, slow, deliberate, repeating every 33 seconds. A perfect cycle. No variation, no error. One technician tried to record it. The audio file was corrupt. Another tried with a phone. All he captured was silence. But those down there, they heard it, and it changed them. By dawn, news had spread across Grayson Hollow that the cave sang. That's what people called it. Not a sound, not a noise, a song. Because even without lyrics, it felt holy, measured, intentional. The cave didn't roar or moan like shifting rock. It sang. That same morning, someone noticed the water beneath the statue had grown slightly warmer. Still, unmoving, but warmer. And on the pedestal, etched so faintly it hadn't been seen before, were three tiny symbols: a circle, a lily, and what looked like a flame. No one claimed to have carved them. The mayor held a press conference to try and quiet the rumors, called it oral illusion due to geological resonance. He smiled too tightly, said there was nothing supernatural about it. But that night, dozens of townspeople came to the edge of the mining road, stood in silence. Some closed their eyes, some opened their arms. All of them listened. And as the wind died down and the stars blinked quietly overhead, a few swore they heard it again, low, rising from the soil, a hum beneath their feet. One woman put her hand to her chest and whispered, "That's not rock, that's worship." And no one corrected her. By the end of the week, they had enough reports to fill a filing cabinet: flickering lights, missing time, water that didn't test as any known composition, a statue that couldn't be cataloged by material. And now, sound. Not echoes, not machinery, a song. One the miners heard in their bones, one the inspectors couldn't forget, one that left something behind not in the chamber, but in them. And still, the company pressed forward. Corporate sent a memo, no letterhead, just black and white type declaring Shaft 9 cleared for limited operations. The phrase was vague by design. It didn't say the chamber was approved for access, but it didn't prohibit it either. It was their way of keeping the option open, just in case the board decided a statue in a mine might turn into a tourist opportunity after all. To the people of Grayson Hollow, it felt like betrayal. Father Miguel said it plainly during Mass that Sunday. There are some things man must not attempt to move, not because he cannot, but because he must not. The church was packed. People stood along the back wall, holding hands, their eyes not on the altar, but on the hill beyond the windows, beneath which she waited. That same day, 3 trucks rolled into town bearing equipment, stabilizers, laser levels, and a generator big enough to power a hospital wing. The company claimed it was for safety, but everyone knew what it meant. They were going to try to move her. They didn't say when, didn't post a schedule, but the preparation was enough. Concrete pads were poured, support beams stacked. Workers hired not from Grayson Hollow, but from out of state. Men who didn't know the stories, who hadn't seen the eyes, who thought the Virgin in the Stone was a local nickname for a cave formation. The town watched in silence. No protests, no signs, just a kind of collective breath being held. Like everyone was waiting for a lightning bolt they knew was coming. Not as punishment, but as a line in the sand. Some of the older miners tried to warn the new arrivals. One pulled a crane operator aside and said, "She's not heavy because of the stone. She's heavy because she's been trusted with something." "And there too," the operator chuckled and said, "I've moved heavier." "Not like this," the miner replied, "and not without permission. But warnings don't satisfy balance sheets." The company had already sunk too much money into the shaft to walk away. And if there really was something sacred down there, they wanted it. Not to destroy it, but to package it, to contain it, maybe even to sell it. Because faith makes for a poor business model. But miracles? Miracles draw crowds. And that's when Grayson Hollow began to pray not for answers but for delay. Because something was coming, not from the town and not from the company, but from the chamber itself. And whatever it was, it would not be quiet. No one could remember who left it there. Some said it was Father Miguel. Others swore it was one of the women from the Wednesday night prayer circle. A few believed it had been placed by a stranger, someone who had come in quietly, unnoticed, just to offer a small light in the darkness. But what everyone remembered was this. It kept burning. One single white candle, thin and ordinary, stood at the base of the Virgin's pedestal. It wasn't thick enough to last more than a few hours. But as day turned into night and night into another day, the flame stayed, steady, unflickering, pure. Not smoke, not soot, not a single drop of wax spilled. The flame was there the next morning, and the one after that, someone tried to blow it out just to see. Nothing happened. They cupped their hand around the flame and exhaled. It didn't even sway. Later, one of the contractors reached toward it, intending to pinch it out with bare fingers. The moment his hand got close, he pulled back, hissing. "It's cold," he said. "The flame's not hot." "What do you mean it's not hot?" someone asked. He held up his fingers. No burns, no heat. "It's like it isn't even fire." After that, no one touched it again. They placed a small cone of stone around it to protect it from the breeze. Then they stopped trying to protect it at all. Because the flame didn't need protection, the flame protected them. People began leaving their own candles beside it. Not to burn, just to witness. They weren't trying to match the miracle, just honor it. And still, the original flame burned on. Unchanged, unaged, undimmed. A team of scientists came from the university in Lexington. They brought thermal sensors, light spectrometers, high-speed cameras. They said it was a chemical illusion, a trick of airflow, or phosphorescent gas trapped under pressure. They ran their tests and left 2 days later with no explanation. "The readings make no sense," one of them said, closing his laptop with shaking hands. "Either we're missing something huge, or something's missing from us." That night, a man who hadn't set foot in a church since his mother's funeral walked into the chamber alone. He knelt beside the flame, weeping. He didn't ask for healing. He didn't ask for a miracle. He just said one sentence over and over, like a chant. "I'm sorry I forgot you." When he left, the flame flickered for the first time in days. Just once, like a breath. The next morning, a thin ring of melted wax appeared around the base. Not from the other candles. Just that one. As if it had acknowledged the prayer and wept. From that day on, no one called it the candle. They called it hers. Hers to light. Hers to extinguish. Hers to hold in a place where the sun could not reach. Because when the world brought machines, she brought flame. And hers refused to die. It started with the teenagers. Of course it did. Grayson Hollow's youth didn't grow up with cathedrals or vespers or even daily mass. Most of them knew the Virgin Mary more from Christmas lawn decorations than scripture. So when they heard the stories, the candle, the puddle, the singing cave, they were curious. But not reverent, not yet. They dared each other to sneak in. It wasn't hard. The company's posted guards were gone by midnight, and the locals certainly weren't stopping anyone. They figured the stories were exaggerated. Old miners trying to feel important. Priests chasing fading miracles. But the moment they reached the mouth of the chamber, something changed. The first group didn't speak of what they saw until days later. 2 boys and a girl 18, maybe 19, descended into the mine around 2 a.m. They brought a flashlight, a GoPro, and a can of spray paint. One of them joked about tagging the wall near the statue, just for proof. They didn't make it that far. Halfway through the tunnel, their light began to dim, not flicker, not fail, but dim, like it was being swallowed by something that didn't want to be seen. The GoPro turned off entirely. Then, ahead of them in the gloom, they saw her. Not the statue, her. She was standing in the middle of the tunnel, about 15 feet away, where the air turned cold and the silence pressed against their eardrums. A woman, dressed in white, not glowing, but impossibly clear, as though the darkness couldn't touch her. Her hair moved gently. Even though the air was still, her hands were clasped in front of her, as though in mourning. Her face, that was the part they couldn't describe. Each of them remembered it differently. One said she looked young, eyes wide with sadness. Another said her skin was wrinkled, ancient but kind. The girl in the group claimed she looked directly at her through her and mouthed a word she couldn't understand. They ran. When they reached the surface, they didn't speak. They didn't laugh or scream or even look at each other. They just sat on the back of a pickup truck, legs swinging off the tailgate, faces pale under the stars. It was 2 days before any of them said a word. And when they finally did, All they said was this: she wasn't stone. After that night, others began reporting sightings. A miner on the day shift swore he saw a figure walking the scaffolding near the chamber entrance barefoot, pale, slow-moving. When he called out, she vanished. A truck driver making a delivery at dawn slammed on the brakes outside the mine, convinced a woman in white had stepped onto the road. But when he got out, there were no footprints, only Lily's fresh ones laying in the dust. And then, perhaps most chilling of all, someone captured a photo on an old flip phone. Blurry, grainy, but in the far corner of the frame, near the mouth of the chamber, stood a figure in white, not glowing, just watching. They didn't announce it. There was no press release, no town hall meeting, no alert to local clergy. The company knew better than to ask permission. They framed it as maintenance, a controlled repositioning exercise buried deep in bureaucratic language. But everyone knew what it really was. They were going to move her. The trucks rolled in just after sunrise, flatbeds with steel frames, rigging coils thicker than a man's arm, and a crane brought in from Tennessee, the kind used to lift radio towers and shipping containers. Workers in orange vests moved quickly, eyes down, pretending not to notice the crowd gathering near the edge of the mine road. It wasn't a protest. It was something quieter, older. The townspeople stood shoulder to shoulder, hands in coat pockets, rosaries in their fingers, lips tight with prayers they hadn't spoken aloud in years. At the front stood Ruth Kelly, 84 years old, with a lily in her hand and a look in her eyes that made grown men glance away. "Don't do this," she whispered to the foreman as he passed. He didn't answer. Down in the shaft, the chamber glowed under harsh construction lights. The workers moved with mechanical precision, anchoring lift hooks around the pedestal's base. They drilled pilot holes, measured angles. One man joked, quietly, that it would be easier to move a cathedral. No one laughed. Then they tried. The crane roared to life. Steel cables strained. A high-pitched whine echoed through the chamber as the lift arms extended and the weight of centuries shifted. And then nothing. She didn't move. Not an inch. The instrument said force was being applied enough to move 3 tons of marble. But the statue held. As if the stone beneath her was not stone at all, but will. The crew adjusted their rigging, rebalanced the weight, tried again. Still nothing. A third attempt was ordered, this time with auxiliary support in double torque. Then came the noise. A low, resonant sound, 3 tones, spaced evenly, deep as thunder and clear as church bells. It rang through the stone, through the equipment, through the men, and then the lights blew. All at once. Every bulb shattered. Every battery died. The chamber fell into darkness. Panic swept through the crew. Radios screamed static. One man shouted that his hands were burning. Another dropped to his knees, sobbing. Someone ran back through the tunnel, yelling about a woman in the shadows, her hands outstretched, her face weeping. The attempt was called off. The crane powered down, and the statue remained silent, still, untouched. By noon, the trucks were gone. By dusk, the only thing left at the site was a single overturned hard hat and the scent of lilies in the air. That evening, a note appeared on the chapel door. No one knew who wrote it, but it was written in careful block letters. You can't move what was placed by prayer. And for the first time in weeks, the mine was silent, truly silent. It didn't come with a quake. There was no thunder, no explosion, no warning, just a quiet groan, so low it could have been mistaken for wind moving through deep hollows. And then collapse. But not the kind that crushes. This one was deliberate, measured. The shift began deep in shaft 9, past the equipment bays and broken rigging lines, beyond the generator hum and rusted steel. It started where the air turned colder, where candles still flickered in offerings left by silent hands, where she stood. At 4:17 a.m., the sensors monitoring the chamber picked up a sudden drop in pressure. Cameras blinked once, then went dark. Above ground, a single tremor registered on the surface, soft enough that coffee mugs didn't spill, but strong enough to wake dogs from sleep. By dawn, it was over. The access tunnel was gone, sealed shut by its own walls, as if the earth had grown tired of being questioned. They sent a crew to investigate, not miners, engineers, the kind with briefcases and degrees and no calluses on their hands. They stood at the mouth of the blockage and frowned. The rock hadn't fallen. It had folded, seamless, smooth, like a door closed from the inside. There was no entry point, no cracks, no sound from beyond, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for company. Attempts to clear the blockage failed. Drills bounced off like tapping glass. Scanners sent into boreholes returned blank data. It was as if the mountain had erased that part of itself, drawing a line that man was not meant to cross again. Father Miguel was the first to understand. She allowed us to see her, he said, standing at the edge of the rock, with his hand pressed against the new wall. Not to claim her, not to prove her, just to remind us. What did she remind us of? A young man asked. The priest didn't answer for a long time. Then, finally, that faith comes before permission. That belief is not earned, it's chosen. And that some miracles are given only once, then hidden again. The water was gone, the candles, the puddle of lilies, all of it sealed behind a stone curtain none could move. And yet, something lingered. At night, people said they still heard it, the hum. The low song of the chamber, faint as memory, rolling beneath the soles of their feet. Others swore the scent of lilies drifted up the mine road just before dawn. Children reported dreams of a woman in white, arms outstretched, standing in a garden of stone. And every now and then, when the town was especially quiet, someone would walk to the edge of the mine entrance, place their hand on the cool rock, and whisper a thank you, not for what had been seen, but for what had been spared, because the cave didn't collapse. It closed. And it wasn't a warning. It was a promise.